Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. I feel like millennials, Gen Zers, Gen Yers, they get this bad rap of being lazy or, maybe just being the visionary and not having the hustle and the follow through to work hard to make it happen. But, let's classifying any group or community of people, by generation or by race or by sexual preference or by male versus female. It's like you're going to have some crazy outliers on both sides, right? So I know some baby boomers that have not yet left their mom's basement. And I know some Gen Yers that are building multi-million-dollar businesses and they'll work 90 hours a week to do it. So, I really hate when people latch onto that, millennials are so lazy, or Gen Xers or Gen Yers or Gen Zers or this. But I think it does go to, they grew up in a different time. They grew up in a different set of financial circumstances. Like, I can't imagine getting out of college and getting your first job right after, 9/11, and then you go through like a mortgage crash, right? And then you go through you've just been through like major economic turmoil at every stage of your adult/professional career. So before we move on, because I want to hear some more about your journey and your company specifically, any tips on, let's say you're over 40, working with people under 40. So you're somewhere between X and baby boomer and you didn't grow up with a cell phone. And now you're working with people who are, their whole identity is online. It's Facebook, it's Twitch, it's Instagram. It's their online persona is more important in many cases than their like in-person persona. So if I'm Chris Lockheed, a friend of mine, has a great talk on this about I'm an analog human being. So I live in the analog world, all this crazy real stuff around me. And then the digital is kind of a secondary avatar of Scott Groves, or maybe even a distraction, where you get people under 40, their digital self, that's their real self, their online avatar, their personality, they're, living in virtual reality now in the metaverse. That's the real person. And this analog stuff out here, the real world, the getting the coffee, that's a distraction, or that's their secondary personality or avatar. So if we're just talking about that one divide, maybe people under 40 managing or working for or working with people under 40, give us kind of like your best COO tips.
I'm going to go at it and I'm going to say there's really only one that you need to know. Now, we do this. So every month with my team, we come together as operators and we do knowledge transfer sessions internally. It's one of the best parts about being part of a fractional team. And you come together as a team because you can go, listen, this is what I'm seeing. These are the trends I'm seeing. I like to talk about this. And consistently, there's only one thing across all the generations, all the clients that you need to remember. Seek to understand first, right? So I had a conversation at one point with my brother, who's a boomer, and he is retired. And so he's not in the workforce anymore. He was a senior manager at a multinational corporation back in the day. And I said, I actually had to have 4 months of conversations about pronouns. And he looked at me with this look on his face. And I said, I know, because you don't understand. I get it. You're not there, right? You're off doing your own thing. You're playing your golf. You're doing your sailing. You're doing whatever. But it's a big thing when you're talking to millennials and you're talking to other generations. And so as an Xer, I kind of straddle both lanes, and I want to make sure I seek to understand, because I want to play the telephone hub. I want to make sure that everybody is going to learn how to communicate with everybody else. And no matter what the issue is, I seek to understand first is a great approach. So if people could do that a little bit more and understand where the other person's coming from and why they're bringing it up, understanding that why makes all the difference in the world when you want to respond to it, especially as a business
all
owner.
Right. So we're gonna ask for some more free coaching here, and you pulled the strings of one of my favorite political hot buttons. When does seeking to understand come into conflict with like, hey, the owner or the CEO or the boss is going to make a decision when those are at odds? So for example, I get it. I understand the thought of putting pronouns in your signature line and on your Zoom stuff because maybe you feel like you're being more inclusive to the person that's, changed their sexuality or confused about their sexuality or whatever. I get it. And if anybody in my team started doing that stuff, they would no longer be on the team because I think it's just like a peacocking political distraction, and I don't want any of that in my business. If I want to argue about politics, I'll go straight to Facebook. I'll find somebody to argue with about politics, but I don't want any of that garbage in either my mortgage business or my coaching business. And I really do feel in my heart of hearts, as let's just say the CEO of my business, I do feel like the pronoun stuff in your bio and whatnot, it's just a political peacocking, I'm on your team, and I think it causes a distraction to the business. That's my opinion. So if I had somebody on my team that was like, I sought to understood, I talked to them about their concerns, I understand why they want to do it, and on this issue, I'm just going to say no. How do you square?
And that's okay, by the way.
Can you repeat that?
CEO,
Can you repeat that?
You're right.
Can you repeat that for the people in the back?
Seek to understand what they're saying, seek to understand in terms of understanding your obligations under the law, right? You don't want to be going and putting yourself into a position, whether it's pronouns or whatever the issue is, right? That you're against legal issues with wherever your jurisdiction is.
Right.
But then you've got to make a decision and just stick to it. And it doesn't mean you have to stick to it forever. This is the decision today.
Right.
EOS has a great model. They call it IDS, identify, discuss, and solve. And I love it because identify comes down to getting your issue into a short sentence. What's the actual issue, right? If you've got to ask a few whys to make sure you're not talking about the symptom and you're talking about the root cause, do it. Make sure you understand why. Seek to understand. But then when you're discussing the different viewpoints and the different, I need to know this, what are my obligations on that? When you start repeating yourself, you're done. Because that's just politicking. You've got no more new things coming out. Now you just need to solve it and make a decision.
Right.
IDS.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, I have respect for founders or CEOs on both sides of this, where it's like, Disney has made a hard left and they've gone all in on the inclusivity and the pronouns and all that stuff. And it's like, that's their business decision. I can choose or choose not to continue to support Disney products. And then I think, I could be wrong on this, maybe Chris can fact check this for me, the founder of crypto.com, the online, wallet and trading, it's the biggest crypto trading in the world. He made a hard right, for lack of a better term. And he's like, hey, there will be no political discussion on our Slack boards. This is a place of profession. Like, I appreciate that you might have your, social justice or political views or whatever. That's for outside. By all means, use the money that you earn as an employee to go invest wherever you want to. There will be no pronouns in the bios. There will be no this. Like, this is a place of business for a financial institution, and we're going to run it as such, and it's like, cool. I can choose either to support crypto.com or not crypto.com, depending on my personal and political beliefs. I don't fault a founder or a CEO who has to make that decision, but I'm guessing the ones that get stuck in the middle and they don't make the decision and then they're kind of held hostage by different factions of their employees, I have to imagine those are the businesses that suffer.
Yes. And why don't they make the decision? Right? Why are those people holding off? Are they trying to be the quiet middle? Sometimes as a founder and a CEO, you just got to make a call. And whether it's right or wrong, you're going to make a call. Tomorrow, you may change your mind as a visionary. Right, that happens, right? New information could come to light. Changes could happen. That's cool. And then you make a different call. But it ultimately comes down to understanding the gamut of your choices, right? Do you only have one choice, two choices, three choices? You've always got to have two or three choices available to you. And yes, sometimes you need to explain to people why you're making the decision that you are as a CEO. But it's also a matter of, now that I, as the leader, have made that decision, you need to rally behind me.
Yeah. Yeah, we got to have that Braveheart moment.
If you choose that you aren't in alignment, that's okay too, right? Yeah. Core values, talk to another conversation, right? About team and making sure that you're hiring and firing and making all those decisions on your core values. It's important to have. And if there's not alignment, that's okay.
Yeah.
And as CEOs, we need to remember, it's okay if the people are not going to stay with us forever.
Totally. And that's why you need the Asana board, right? That's why you need the Asana board and the process and the system, so that when you do have to replace an employee, whether they're an entry-level employee or a key, right-hand man employee, you've got everything set up for that new person to succeed, which I did not have prior to having, Ashley and Bob. So kudos to your company for that. I want to, oh, sorry, go ahead. Finish that thought and then we'll shift gears a little bit if you've got
Okay.
time.
Yeah, I've got time. So I spent 20 years in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, I spent 20 years in the pharmaceutical industry in the animal side of things, not the human side of things. So my jokes were always funnier, especially since we were on the reproductive side. So, you could walk in and you could have a lot of fun. And I came into work one day, and after the 20 years, I called myself a lifer. I said, okay, I'm here forever. I absolutely love the culture here. I love the business. I walked into my office. They gave me this big, beautiful plaque, and the plaque talked about how wonderful my contributions had been. And then they gave me a pink slip. Mismanagement at the top meant that I was out of a job with 43 of my fellow friends. We all walked out of the building that day. And so we kind of joke about it around here with fractional operations people, is that we come into a business looking for the pink slip because we've done our job well. You've grown, you've scaled, you no longer need us. Now you maybe need that full-time person, and we're happy to help make that happen too.
Yeah, that's amazing because, shifting gears to your business specifically, and I don't mind sharing what I pay for my fractional COO and my fractional operations manager. I pay $10,000 total. I don't know how that gets broke down on your side. Feel free to share or not share. But my understanding is I basically get Ashley and Bob for about 12 to 15 hours each, somewhere in there to run meetings or do whatever we decide to do. Sometimes it's a little bit less, sometimes it's a little bit more, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it's a lot less, sometimes it's a lot more. But talking about your business specifically, I don't think you're shy about your price point either. Can you tell people kind of in my bucket what I get and what I'm paying for? And then if you have a bucket above me or a bucket below me, can you just talk a little bit about your business model and how that came to be?
Yeah. And I'm actually going to start back a little bit on how the business model came to be, if I could, because it's been a bit of an evolution. So when I walked out of that wonderful pharmaceutical job, I said to myself, well, what am I going to be when I grow up? So I decided to be a solopreneur. I hung up my shingle. I played in that field for a while. That was great. But I realized with the pandemic that ultimately, hit by bus theory, I get hit by a bus. I'm a single mom. What happens to my daughter? Right? That's not a very scalable thing. In succession planning, I would coach my own clients to do other things. So it's time to eat my own cooking. The first thing I did was I looked around for a business model that allowed me to scale, that was still planning to keep the business small in terms of, well, I really only want to take on, as a fractional client at that point, I could only take on 3 clients. So I said, great. I have 3 clients, but how do I make that 6 clients?
So just to be clear, you were the first fractional COO for your own company, Scaling Management Consulting Group.
Correct.
Cool. And based on, kind of hourly workload and spending time with your daughter and wanting to have a life and run, which I know running has not been available for you because you broke your little toe. But to do all the things, you could take on about 3 clients and be their fractional COO.
Correct. Because I wanted to continue to add value to the rest of the community. So I was doing postings and YouTube videos and all those other things, and that would take time. And then I had to be mom. And so I really felt that it was a matter of 3 clients, 4 maximum. If it was a smaller client that I could add in, that was maybe only another half day. Because even though we say it's only going to be a day a week, for example, it's never a day a week. Right. We spend all sorts of time on the weekends, or we do things before or after other stuff. So it was never that. So I looked around for a business model, and I actually looked at the bookkeepers and the CPAs in particular. So often CPA firms will have bookkeepers in-house because bookkeepers are junior, and then the CPAs only come in to give you advice, be more strategic and less tactical. And I said, that's an interesting model. Let's test it out. So I brought in my first operations manager. Worked beautifully. So I went from 3 clients to 6 clients, and I could take on those extra pieces. Not a problem. I made a boo-boo in doing 6 clients because each one still got a day.
Right.
So it was a little bit of a problem by the time the end of the week hit, but everybody got fulfilled. And so that was the business model that you've got, right? You've got where a COO comes in essentially for a day a week, give or take the hours, right? It ranges, whether there's more or less to do. And you've got an operations manager that's there between 15 and 20 hours a week.
Yep.
And that's the model that we've got for Scott. And that was, back then it wasn't 10,000, but when I have to pay other people, now it was $10,000 a month.
Right.
Because the way the business model works is it's almost an 80-20 rule. It's not quite, there's a little bit of a percentage point difference there, but it's about an 80-20 rule. So 80% goes to the contractors and 20% stays for the overhead.
Perfect. So
right?
you sourced Bob, you contract him out to me. You sourced Ashley, you contract her out to me. The company, Scaling Management Consulting Group, keeps about 20% profit margin, which is awesome because I have to imagine you have little overhead other than headhunting for these people. And then they get about 80%. And I even asked Bob, I was like, hey man, like I kind of guessed as much. I was like, excuse me. I'm guessing I'm paying about $5,000 or $6,000 for you. I was guessing he's probably getting about 70% of that money. I'm like, Bob, you're old, like you're quasi-retired. Why are you doing this? And he's like, well, I'm doing this for 3 reasons. One, I was part of a couple big tech companies where a couple times I was months away from having like FU big boy money, and either the company failed or something didn't work out in a merger or whatever. So he's like, I've got retirement, I've got good money, but I don't have FU money. So every month that I don't have to withdraw out of my retirement is like a win and more money I can leave to my kids. And he would say that publicly because he said it in front of 10 other people. That's why I'm comfortable saying it here on this call. And then he said, number two, I've just have this knowledge base that I feel inclined to get out to people, and like I just want to add value where I can to a younger generation. And number three, with this income, I get to play private golf courses in my retirement instead of public golf courses in my retirement. I'm like, these are all very good reasons. And then he's made many jokes about how he's keeping me from having a heart attack and I'm keeping him from getting Alzheimer's. So it's kind of like a perfect mesh. But that totally made sense to me, right? And then I get this awesome quality in a CEO and an operations manager. So that's awesome for your business model. How are you sourcing these people? Because you just don't come across every day people that can be COOs in a multitude of other businesses or amazing operations managers. So how are you sourcing these people for your business now that you're scaling?
Great question. And so I found most of them actually because I was an EOS implementer at one point in time. I was trained for that. And so I have a community of implementers. A lot of implementers also tend to be integrators. And so speaking to people, the first round of people that came in, like Bob was one of those rounds, they're from that community. And then you know what happens, Scott? And this is what the beauty of the model that I've got now. But Bob and those other first round people, they are loving it here. They adore it. We haven't had people leave. They said, yeah, we just want to stay. We want to have some fun. And we want to, because you guys let us pick and choose our clients. Like, Scott, if Bob had come off that call and said, I don't want to talk to Scott ever again, right, you wouldn't have having Bob on your team.
Which, by the way, I have the type of personality that there are some people you could have put on that call where they're like, dude, I am not working with this ball of fire. Like, no chance. He cusses too much. He's got too many ideas. Like, this is not my wheelhouse. But Bob was willing to take on the challenge.
He was, and we thank Bob greatly.
Yes, every day.
And Ashley. And so great people, guess what they know? Great people. Now I go to my team when I'm doing a hiring round and I go, guys, I need to bring in some more people. Do you all know anybody who is already a fractional COO or integrator or operations manager, depending on what I'm hiring? And can you send them to come on forward? And I'd love to meet them if they're interested. So we come through and we do that. My first hire on my team was actually my chief culture officer. He's actually a team builder. And he's a former Olympian. His name's Bob Millay. Fantastic guy. The team folks come and they talk to me. Then I send them over to Bob and Bob has a conversation with them, different Bob than your Bob. And then they come back to me. If both Bob and I say thumbs up, then we're good to go.
Nice. And I'm wondering, how do you find operations managers? Because operations manager to me sounds like the seventh circle of hell, like making sure that everything gets done and it's task oriented. And, I'll share this because I've forgiven her and all is good. But we had on this big webinar that we did, we had a misfire on like some Zoom buttons and some integration, like didn't get clicked here. And then little did we know that the software that we use, Zapier or if this, then that, that's like firing these people over to these things. We only get like 500 zaps a month. And so then these people didn't get zapped there. And it's just, I'm going to cuss, I think for the first time in the podcast, we call it the daisy chain of fuckery, having to like plug all these softwares in and like some password always has to get reset. Some service always has to get upgraded because now you have too many attendees or you have too many of this or whatever. So we had like a misfire and a bunch of people couldn't get on live, but they got the replay, whatever. Ashley beat herself up so hard on like that because, that's her zone of genius, right? Checking all these boxes and making sure all this stuff works. having to do that and then having to suffer the ramifications when something goes wrong, again, that sounds like the seventh circle of hell to me. So what are the personality traits, or how do you find these great operations managers? Like, because, visionaries or CEOs, they want to hire other people like them, right? I want to find like other salespeople who are super fired up and they want to do the stuff. And then I'm like, cool, sit down and do the work. And then they fail miserably because they're the creative type or the visionary type, and we totally hired the wrong person. So how do you find these world-class integrators and operations managers? Because like that everything about that personality type, interviewing them, it all sounds totally foreign to me.
Does it?
Yeah.
Good. It's a good thing you got Bob and Ashley.
Right. Shameless plug for continuing to pay them. I love it.
We use Strength Finder over here. And the thing that Bob and I always chuckle about is that we have a consistent profile. It's not done on purpose, by the way.
Right.
But everyone who comes through as a COO, an integrator, or an operations manager, they're all what we call lifelines. They're servant leaders. And so when we go out and we are having conversations with people, I don't need to use Indeed. I don't need to use a recruiter. I don't need to do any of these things, because great people get referred to us all the time in order to become part of the team. So when we interview them, it's all about, well, we give them some real world test pieces, right? Can you follow a set of instructions like how I asked you to actually send me an introductory video of X number of minutes? And I am going to be particular at going, did you actually fall within the minutes?
Wait. So give me an example. When you're asking for somebody to interview with you, you give them some checkpoints of give us like the script or what you're using to find these people.
Yeah, so these guys don't even get a job description first, by the way, because they've come in by referral. Okay. They know Ashley, or they know Lillian, or they know James, or they know Jill, or whoever it is. And they go, oh, hey, Mike talked to me last night at a cocktail party. And he said, when I said I was going to be looking for a new gig, he said I should contact you because I've got kind of the right experience. So great. Here's my LinkedIn profile. Mike said to send you that. And how can we communicate? Okay, so when I respond to them, I've looked at their LinkedIn profile. I don't care about your resume anymore. I'm sorry, it's kind of antiquated. I want a video, because everybody sees everybody these days. I want to know what your background looks like. I want to know what you chose to say on that video. And then I'm going to do a little Googling, and I'm going to go, okay, well, do you actually show up as the person you want to? Because we had somebody on a team once, and we Googled, and it was not good. And you're like, wow, how could you not talk about that in the interviews? Like the big giant elephant in the room. But they didn't. So after we have some of these pieces and we ask them questions on this, hey, if you had this person and this business case, and we will use past clients in order to use real life business cases, what would you do? How would you advise, Scott, on this case? What would you do if you were Ashley and you accidentally did this thing and 500 people didn't make it? What would you do? What's your first thing? Is the first thing that you say apologize? Because it better be.
Right.
Because holy spokes, right? Then they come in and they talk to me. I want to know their story. I want to know who they are at their core, right? When you and I met, I knew what you were going to be like. I knew not to put you with Mike and to put you with Bob.
Yeah.
I had a pretty good sense of all of that after we talked for our half an hour. It was okay.
Right.
So they come in, they talk to me for that half an hour. And if they get past me and I feel, okay, you are an existing fractional. Because if people come out of corporate and they say, oh, I want to hang up my shingle, I got to say, usually they go back to corporate. And that's just not good for our clients. We don't want them cycling in and out. So little red flags in conversations can come up. If you pass me, you get a Strength Finder survey. If you get the Strength Finder survey, you get over to Bob. Bob's going to have a conversation. It's going to be booked for half an hour. It'll always take an hour because everybody loves Bob.
Yep.
And then Bob will give me a note. And sometimes Bob will say things like, ooh, that was transactional. One of our core values is that we build long-term relationships. If you can't build a relationship, If you can't build a relationship with Bob, who builds a relationship with everybody,
Right.
that's a problem, because we don't want that for our clients. We want somebody who is going to think of them first.
Right.
And so if you get a thumbs up from Bob and you get a thumbs up from me, then you come back and we're going to talk about the business model. We're going to talk about the compensation. We're going to talk about how it works for hours. We're going to talk about all those little logistics. And after you've heard that, then if you're still going, yep, you're absolutely, you want to join the team, then you get a contract.
Interesting.
Then we test you out.
And are you creating a stable of people before you find the potential client who's going to hire them, or do you go out to the field and find somebody once Scott Groves hits you up with a job need?
No, we've got a stable of people. And so I went from a solopreneur when we changed the business model to I've got now just over 25 people on the team. That's wow. 18 months. So we've served over 1,100 clients at this point in time in different facets, right? Sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's a full fractional experience like you've got, and you've got the highest tier, Scott. It's very interesting, but we always keep enough on our virtual bench because people cycle in and out. We're the business arm for these other existing fractional COOs and integrators.
Right. Fascinating. I've got a buddy who has a similar business model. My attorney, actually, Alex Bruno, shout out to Alex. We met in a professional development group, and he advertises himself as like, I am the small business attorney before you have enough revenue to bring in a full-time attorney. So, he's probably got, I'm just guessing, 100, 140 clients who, I'm never going to need a full-time business attorney, but I got to refresh my trust every once in a while. And then I'm going to negotiate a contract with a mortgage company who wants me to come in to do some training. And I need to make sure there's not something in there that prevents me from coaching my other clients. And, there's a million of these things that come up. So he's got, couple hundred clients like me, 140, 100, probably between 100 and 200 clients like me who just need fractional legal services, right? And I would guess, I probably pay him a few $1,000s a year. He has limited overhead, multiply me by 100 or 200 people. That's a really great living just being a fractional service provider. So if I'm at the highest level, tell me where people with your business model might start. Maybe they just need like that 1 hour consult. Like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem. I don't even need a full-time COO. I just need 5 hours worth of advice. What's kind of your entry level tier of getting people familiar with your business?
Yeah, we actually start at 3 hours a month. That's our entry level. And we do it as an automated thing. It's not the full customized experience, only because it takes to onboard a client traditionally takes 20 hours of my time. Oh, wow. And so it's a real handheld type of experience. The client doesn't usually see that, but it's a lot of back end conversations. And what about this? Did you ask about that? And how, all of those things, but we're scoping things out appropriately. But when we start at the front end, anybody who's making more than $250,000 in annual revenue up to that $750,000, $800,000 mark, I'd say that's the sweet spot you want to start out. So we just launched actually scalingresources.com, which I'm super excited about because the whole point of that was to make sure that people had on-demand access to really great quality people who are COOs, integrators, and operations managers. You come in, for $800 a month, you get 3 hours with the COO, plus a whole bunch of digital tools and assets and all of these other things. We run events on a regular basis, and then you get all of that training, and you can also purchase additional hours if you want them or if you need them. But if you don't, that's fine too, right? 3 hours we found was the right amount when we tested it out last year.
Awesome. And do you mind if I ask, will you charge hourly for that?
Oh, it's not hourly. It's a monthly recurring piece. So it's $800 because then you get the digital program that we've got. Then you get the events that we've got. So there's a whole bunch of things that are included that come up that we try to make sure we're being super topical. Look, perfect. We find that there's a few macro trends out there right now that are taking place, right? We know that we are in recessionary times. We know that dollars are getting tight. We know that businesses are having to take that step back sometimes from thinking that they can afford this. And so how do you still make sure that you can help the maximum number of businesses add the most value with great experienced people, right, who are retiring? So they don't always want to retire and play golf 100% of the time. Right, sometimes they want to just have some fun. And they have got this vast knowledge and experience. And why not tap into it, right? So we find that access is really helping these other businesses to struggle. And if we can make sure that it's cash flow positive for them and we're not impacting them negatively, that's the place to start.
Yeah, interesting. I've got two questions about those macro trends. One, how are you advising clients right now in this market, end of 2022? You know, depending on who you listen to politically, they might try to pretend like we're not in a recession, but we're in a recession. Inflation, whether it's inflation on goods or workers. I mean, my 20-year-old son, his girlfriend's getting, I think it's 18 or 21 bucks an hour at Chipotle to roll burritos because they can't find anybody to work. So, you know, businesses are dealing with huge inflationary pressures. I'd love to hear, one, what are the macro trends you're advising on? Well, let's go there, and then I'll ask the follow-up conversation about macro trends. Number one is, like, how are you advising your clients? I love the fact that you do knowledge dumps where all of your team members get together, and this is what we're seeing across industries. Like, who's thriving, who's dying, what advices are you giving on spending and overhead and all that kind of stuff?
Well, and that's just it, is that you've got to have your numbers. It always goes back to, if I'm going to ask you the question, well, how do you survive? I'm going to start by looking at your business model itself. And so I can't look at the business model if you don't know your numbers, if you don't know that profitability, you don't know that you're able to take things out. What's your operating cash flow look like? And yes, sometimes that means I'm going to give you some homework. Visionaries hate that, by the way.
Yeah, homework's the worst.
I know, but you're the one who's got the vision. So you're going to have to be the one to do the work. I'm sorry.
Perfect.
When it comes to some of this, a lot of the teams I find that we work with, it is team as the number one challenge and the number one expense. And so they're looking at it going, we just came through a pandemic where a lot of people did the great resignation thing. They're not in the workforce. So that made a problem where I had to compete more, pay more in order to actually get the team on board. Now that I've got the team on board and I'm paying them more, my profit margins have shrunk. And now my loans are costing more. The inflation numbers are going up. I mean, oh my gosh, it's insane. And they are going to want another raise. How do I afford this? Do I have to look at where do I have to cut expenses? That's number one. Is there something I need to do for my own pricing? What's the price sensitivity of what I offer? Okay, great. What are the other profitable pieces that we can wind up pulling? How about strategic relationships? How about referral programs, right? As opposed to always going to ad spend. What are those different elements? And so it depends on the business model, but the team tends to be the number one thing that people wind up paying for. And so really trying to maximize the productivity and the utility of the team. And that doesn't mean work people to death.
Right.
That means how do we make sure we're making the best choices and putting people where they need to be for success of themselves and success of the company.
Yeah. And I'm trying to balance two thoughts in my mind right now. And maybe you can give me some coaching on this. And by the way, I think everybody we have on the team right now is like A talent. So I'm not currently dealing with this dilemma, but I have before. Thought number one is it is a giant pain in the ass to let somebody go, pay them some type of severance, hire somebody new, take a risk on somebody new, train them up to do the job. You just lose months and potentially tens of thousands of dollars. So I'm trying to balance the thought of like, man, if I've got a B- to a B+ player, what is the headache involved with letting them go and replacing them? Versus, like, this might be a great time when people are getting laid off or companies are struggling to kind of top grade my talent and substitute a B+ player for an A+ player. They might cost the same, they might cost a little bit more, but as we talked about earlier, if you have A+ players, they pay for themselves because they generate so much more revenue than they cost you. So balancing those two thoughts of like, all right, somebody's watching this right now, they've got some B player talent and they're looking, in the mortgage industry, for example, I've got a loan officer assistant, a processor, an executive assistant. They're good, but not great. They're a B- to a B+. God, do I really want to go through the headache of this in this market of letting them go, bringing in somebody else, hoping that I interviewed correctly and I am top grading to an A+ player and them training them and blah, all the stuff that goes with that versus like, no, man, this is the time to upgrade talent and you're going to have to do that to stay profitable during a recession. How do I balance those two thoughts, or what's the right answer?
I am going to give Chris a link to something that I did for some of my folks called the cost of a mishire. So I actually did a video on that. So we'll give that over to your listeners to take a look at. But if you've got everyone on your team, there's usually a bottom 10%, right? Like, don't toss out the baby with the bathwater. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
You've got to do it in ways where, okay, so if you are having a problem with one team member, address that problem, because the cost to stick your head in the sand like an ostrich is huge. Even if they're a B player, what's the opportunity cost of not having an A+ player? Right? I'm sure they've done great things. I'm sure there's also costs. Yes, there's investment in making sure the other people come in, although with systems in place and onboarding processes, ultimately you'll have a little easier time getting the next person on board.
Right.
But I'd look bottom 10% first.
Bottom 10%, probably get rid of them.
You know, it's funny. I talk about this with my team a lot, and it's really a matter of hire slow and fire fast. I know when I walk into meetings with people, if it's not a hell yes, I love that person, we need a conversation.
Right.
Because, oh my gosh, why is it not a hell yes? Why am I not in love with that team member? Maybe there's something that's going on with that person right now in their life.
Right.
Okay, that happens. But maybe they're not a fit. Please don't drag it out for either party. You're, as a company, you as the founder, you're going to hate it. And so are they.
Yeah.
They're not going to see it because they're not going to want to leave because they want the security. But ultimately, if they're not a fit, you're not doing them any favors.
Right. Yeah, this is reminding me of Jack Welch's book, the world famous CEO of GE. His book Winning. He talked about a couple of things. He was like, I can't remember if it was quarter or every year, I fire the bottom 10% of sales staff, period. Like, sales staff and middle managers, bottom 10% by the metrics we established, they're gone, period. Number two, the hell yes or a hell no. He talked about that in the book. And the other thing he talked about that was pretty interesting is, like, when you go to terminate somebody, they should be surprised. Because if they're not surprised, it means that you drug it on too long and you knew they weren't a fit and they knew it weren't a fit, and maybe they were already looking for another job, or there was kind of this great resignation. They had kind of silent quit. You weren't getting the most out of them. They weren't getting the most out of you. It wasn't a fit. You should be letting people go when it's kind of a surprise to them of like, hey man, we've identified this isn't a great fit. We want you to move on. We need to move on. We're going to take care of you in the transition. But if you get on a call and they're like, so are you firing me? It's like, oh, you probably waited somewhere between 3 months and 3 years too long to get rid of them because everybody kind of saw the writing on the wall. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to explain you doing the best thing by the employee and them doing the best thing by the company.
Correct. I couldn't agree with that more. You know, you want people to be happy and fulfilled in their life. And sometimes that means you need to release them to succeed elsewhere.
Yeah, totally. I want to talk about one more kind of macro economic trend, and let's take out the Amazons and the Teslas of the world where like their business model is to run at a huge loss, continue to bring on venture capital money. I think Amazon was it was an unprofitable company for 12 years and their stock just kept going through the roof because like everybody saw the long-term goal. Let's assume we're not a tech startup. Let's assume we're not one of these, going to be Fortune 100 companies that one day, you're a smaller business, you're starting up, you're somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million in revenue. Again, Scott Grove's here trying to balance two thoughts. One is in recessionary times, it might be a good time for the founder or the CEO to take less money, lean in, double down on the staffing, double down on the marketing, double down on the market exposure, and like really forego some profits to grow during a recessionary time. The last recession 11, 12 years ago is when great businesses like Zoom were started. And I just said, let's ignore the tech companies, but I'm just using that as an example. So there's one like thought pulling on visionaries, like let's lean in, let's blow it off the rails. I don't care if I make any money this year because this is the year to grow and lean in when everybody's leaning out. And then the other thought I'm trying to balance with this is like the road to hell is basically paved with the intentions of scaling at all costs, right? So it's like, great, I could scale tomorrow to $3 million in revenue in this coaching business, but I would probably profit less. So do I want more headaches and more overhead and more expense to scale just for the sake of scaling, but I'm really not making any additional revenue, and I'm probably diminishing the quality of life for myself, my wife, my family, because we're scaling just for the sake of scaling. So balancing those two thoughts during a recessionary period of like, let's grow to grow and lean in when other companies are cutting their marketing budget and they're not providing the best service and whatnot. Let's grow because like we're going to capture more market share. And when the market turns around and I can charge more for coaching, profit margins go through the roof. Or, hey, Scott, you're trying really just to scale for ego, and there's really no extra profit or benefit here unless your goal is just to help more people and not make more money. So if I'm thinking those two thoughts, do you have a bias on one or the other, or some coaching there on how we can at least like frame this and think through these two different lenses?
That's a tough one. It's so individual, Scott, because some of our clients, they are all about, I really want to grow. That's my vision. That's my goal. And other clients, they've said, listen, I've grown. I've done well. Now I need to stabilize. I need to change my goal. My goal is not to double next year. My goal is not to 10x. I know we talk about these numbers because doesn't that sound cool at a cocktail party?
Right.
I 10x my business last year.
It's the Grant Cardone dilemma, right? Where he's like, you got to 10x. If you're thinking $1 million in revenue, think 10 million in revenue. If you think you can buy a $5 million commercial building, buy a $50 million commercial building. It's like, but there's a whole lot more risk of ruin in buying a $50 million commercial building versus a $5 million commercial building, bro. Like you got to take that stuff into consideration. So, maybe this is the 10x fallacy. We can name this clip or something. But so sorry, I cut you off, but it's like, I hate that. Like, let's just grow to grow. It's like, all right, well, there's a lot of mortgage companies that grew just to grow. And then they realize like, oh, if we were unprofitable funding one loan and now we're unprofitable funding 10,000 loans, it basically means we just scaled ourselves into bankruptcy. So
correct.
I can't square these two thoughts in my mind on what direction to go.
And it's very personal to the founder. We're going into such challenging times depending on who you listen to, it's more or less, but I think everybody can see the inflation, everybody can see the interest rates and all of that. Making sure that you have the ability to survive and thrive and really grow once it's over, critically important. So what's the goal is my number one question to that founder. So if you're listening, what's your goal? Is it going to be growth and scale? Is it going to be stabilization? Right? I don't know. But whatever your goal is, your business model has to feed that goal. So that's my point number 2 would be, what's your business model currently? Does it actually feed your goal? Or do you need to make shifts or changes? What levers do you need to pull to get to your goal? Royal Caribbean, when the pandemic hit, I'd read an article somewhere, I think it was on Entrepreneur or some such thing. And Royal Caribbean had 5 years of emergency funds in the kitty. Royal Caribbean had no trouble coming through the pandemic, right? Other cruise lines were not so lucky. Their kitty was not so big. So what do we need to make sure that we're doing? Because you're absolutely right. If you have something that's a bad decision on one point of sale, and you scale that and you're losing money now 10 times more, you're gone. You're never going to survive. And why would you wind up doing that? You need to know your downside risk. Profit is great. By the way, profit is lovely. We love to talk about profit margins, but operating cash flow is a great thing to talk about. So that's how much money is actually in your bank account. How much money can you pull from? If something happened to your business and you needed to pay the team, what's your operating cash flow? I just found out this summer, I was doing this manually for my own business for a while, and I just found out that it's actually a thing, a report that comes out of most accounting softwares. Who knew?
Who knew? QuickBooks for the win. QuickBooks for the win. And I have to imagine, I have a reoccurring business model of coaching where we charge reoccurring fees for coaching. I have to imagine that's why those businesses have become so valuable, right? The next Netflix or, Amazon Prime subscriptions now equate for a huge amount of the profit margins for Amazon. Like anything that's gone to a reoccurring revenue subscription model, all the way down to if you order socks on Bombas, Bombas, I think one of their options is like, hey, we know you're going to run out of socks. How about we just send you a new, 4 pair of socks every 3 months or something, right? Because that operating cash flow and knowing that there's a consistent consistency. I've got a friend that runs a massive nonprofit, and he's like, the truth is, we rather have a bunch of $99 a month donors that are going to donate in perpetuity than to have Scott Grove strike a check for $5,000 or $10,000 as a one-time gift, because our operating capital is more easy to project when we have those, those subscribing members. So how does that play into it? Like operating capital, I don't need to keep a lot of money on hand. Maybe I have 2 months of payroll just in case everybody drops out of coaching at one time, and it's going to take me 2 months to wind down the business and say, well, I gave it a good try. I can at least pay everybody for a couple months. But can you talk a little bit about what that operating cash flow actually means?
Well, it will be a little different depending on what business model and business and industry you're in, right? So for example, a coaching business is a great example. You have obligations. Some people pay annually. They might have an expectation that if you went into trouble at the beginning of their annual payment, that you would still fulfill for the rest of the year, or you would have to refund, right? And do you have the operating cash flow, but in the bank that says, I can pay you back?
Right.
So asking the business, what kind of obligations do I have that if I stopped selling today, no money came in, what do I need to fulfill on? So we talked about Amber. Big shout out to Amber. She's absolutely amazing. And she does book launches, right? So you come in and you have a book launch here, maybe 6, 8 months, depends on when the publisher decides everything. And so if I was asking her this question, she would have a different answer than you, Scott, because her clients have 6 to 8 months where, if it happened at the very beginning, I'm still obligated to fulfill on the contract that we have.
Yeah.
And so how would we make sure she's got enough money is different than you. But ultimately, I would make sure I'm looking at those accounts and reports. Maybe you have a fractional CFO. Maybe you have an accountant. Maybe you have a bookkeeper that can give you a management report that says, okay, you currently have in the bank enough money for a week, a month, a year, if you made no more sales. What does that number need to be? And the recurring piece is so nice because it does make things predictable. If you knew you had enough money coming in on contract for the next 12 months to cover every expense that you have, that's a great place to be in.
Amazing. I love that. And then, I wonder this question, how often do you as a COO have to step in and tell founders, hey, this project or this idea on scaling, is that more ego or is that a real business decision? Because I have to imagine, I won't use their name, but there was a coaching company that called me. We were going to do something together. We were going to do some co-branded coaching and stuff like that. And I'm totally transparent. I'm like, hey, if you have a service that my coaching clients need that I'm offering, great. Like, I want to provide that. And then at one point, I don't know if this was the intention of the call, but after we got about an hour into the call, they mentioned, they're like, well, we could always just buy your company. And then we could do like a merger or something like that. I'm like, great, 3 times revenue. Here was my revenue from last year. Here was my net profit. You want to stroke me a check for $2.5 million? Let's do it, man. You buy the company away. And they're like, wait a minute, you made how much from how many coaching clients with what profit model? And then what I realized is, as much as I love these guys, I think they're wonderful guys. I think they're doing great stuff in the real estate and mortgage coaching business. They're scaling just for the sake of scaling. And I think there's some ego there because, the pool of loan officers who need coaching is actually fairly finite. Maybe there's only 25 or 30,000 potential coaching clients in the entire country. And so I was looking at it, I was like, dude, if you're not making money at the level where you're currently running your business, you're not going to get to a point where you're making money. And maybe, I'm projecting here, or I'm guessing, maybe they're just scaling for the sake of scaling. And it's more of an ego thing. And there's some other, avenues where maybe they're using that coaching business to recruit for a specific mortgage company, which I hate that, by the way, but whatever. And how often do you have to step in and give people a little bit of a reality check of like, hey, are we doing the best thing for the business or are we doing the best thing for your ego?
Every quarter, I ask all of my founders.
Every 90 days, a founder needs to be hip checked by Susan to be like, hey, man, is this ego or is this growth?
It's part of our strategic planning. It's going to be the first series of questions. Hey, what did we do right last quarter? What can we improve on last quarter? And what's the vision for the next quarter? Let's talk about it. Because the vision sets the compensation and all of that for the next 6 hours that we're going to talk about team and products and profitability, because it needs to be in alignment with the founder and CEO's goals. So I need to know. Seek to understand, but then I have to ask the questions, the hard questions. That's my job as a COO.
And then once you understand, you can go to the founder and be like, hey, man, this is not in alignment. I don't know why you're thinking of this. Either you got a wild hair up your behind, or this is ego, or this is like misplaced energy. But like, this does not align with the vision we talked about 2 months ago. Is that a fair assessment about how you might have to have the tough conversation with really the person who's employing you?
My client, absolutely. But sometimes that's what we need. You're a coach, Scott. Sometimes you have to tell people the hard truth and say, okay, I had a client once who loved to do end runs. You know what an end run is?
No.
An end run is where, as a COO or integrator, I am your second in command. And every time you run around me to do something because you don't like my answer and you know my answer will be no, or let's talk about it next week on our same page meeting, because I know it's one of those things that need to be in the long-term parking lot, because you're going to take the team and move them completely sideways. And then in 2 more days, you're going to be really frustrated because nothing got done.
Right.
Hey, you got to stop going around me. If you don't stop going around me, then there's no reason for me to be here. That's fine. That's totally your choice. You are the founder. You are the one in control.
Yeah. See, in America, we call those an end around. So I knew what you were talking about. I just didn't know you were saying for it. Finally, I got something out of you that sounded Canadian.
Really? Because it came from the EOS model.
You haven't said A. You haven't said A at least like one time. So I don't know if you're a real Canadian.
I do not do A. Come on.
A.
My language.
We got to get your business in the right way. A. It's like Americans were horrible at saying and Canadians usually say A. Like it's like just a holding word for when I can't think of what I want to say. It's yeah. Okay. Now I gathered my thoughts. All right.
And millenniums say like.
Like, oh, great. I hate that worse. That's like that Valley Girl, from the 80s. Like, they're like, and then, and there's that weird, by the way, I could never hire somebody that talks like that stereotypical 80s Valley Girl from all the coming of age movies. If you put an overemphasis on the last syllable of the word, there's no way I could hire that person. I'd be like, you're going to drive me effing nuts. So shout out if you're applying for a job with Scott Groves, do not emphasize the last syllable of every one of your words or we're not going to work together. Not that a whole lot of
people shout out for me. If every other word is like, we're going to have
not working for you. Although I am glad that you stuck me with people that could handle pretty much every adjective, verb, and adverb that I use is the F word. So we have a perfect model match there of people that are helping us. All right. I want to close because I know your time's super valuable on what's the thing that I forgot to ask, or what's the part of running a fractional COO business that I'm not asking. What did I miss?
There's so much in that one, man, Scott. What did you not ask? What did we not cover? We covered team. We covered macro. We covered vision. I got to go back to data.
All right, go to the data.
I got to go back to data because
silly scientists.
I know. Dang it. The data is so important. If you want to improve, you need to know where you are. And so many people are so busy running around doing, they forget to take the time to evaluate the data. Take the time to evaluate the data, please, even if it's 20 minutes. If you have somebody on your team, I have a guy on my team whose sole responsibility is every Monday. Well, it's not his sole responsibility. That would be silly. But every Monday he gives me a sheet. It's all the marketing metrics. I keep adding to it. He's not happy with me about that. But I need to know that when I look across that row, I'm looking for certain red flags. And if I don't see it, great. I have spent a great 30 seconds scanning that row. Off we go on to the next one. And if I see one of my leading indicators that's off, I know to dig in. But if I don't have that eyeball look on my data, I'll never know what to do. Can I leave you with a second one?
Sure. Can I give a plug for data real quick?
Yeah.
One of the things that we do in our mortgage coaching is the 5 C's. So how many calls did you make? How many contacts are coming in, AKA leads? How many credit pools? How many contracts? And then how many closings? And I tell people all the time, if you're working for a manager in the mortgage business who's only tracking your closings, they're 9 months behind. Like, that's not a good leader, because it's the calls that lead to the leads or the contacts, which leads to the credit pulls. You show me any loan officer in the country's number of credit pulls per week or per month, I can almost project for you, like, down to a couple $1,000s, what they're going to make 6 months from now, 5 months from now, a year from now. So like, I'm a big fan of data. And what's interesting in these recessionary times, the people in my coaching business that are tracking their 5 C's, they're also the ones that aren't freaked out. Because they're like, hey, I'm making the calls, which is leading to this many contacts, AKA name and phone numbers or name and email addresses. I'm pulling this many credit reports. So maybe these people are a little spooked right now by interest rates, or they're spooked by prices or whatnot. They're kind of on the bench. But if they let me pull their credit, I know they're going to become a client who closes a mortgage at some point during the next 12 months. So my clients that aren't tracking, they're freaking out. They're like, where's my next deal coming from? I don't know my matrix, blah, 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 blah. The people that are tracking and do know their, not matrix, their metrics, they do know their metrics. They're like, all right, well, at least the leads are coming in. The market's going to be what the market's going to be, and it will take care of itself at some point in the future, as long as I have a process for staying in touch with them. So I'm a big fan of data. And let's go to your number 2 that I might have just completely cut off your train of thought.
Nope, I wrote it down. But before we do that, you added another one to just do another plug for understanding your customer journey, because those numbers, those pieces, as an owner of a business, you need to go back and understand where your customer journey is. We looked at that in July. I know we got off on sidetrack, but where I was going to go with that particular story was when I looked at it and I looked at all the different steps across the funnel, there was one lever in particular that if I take that as an 8% close, which currently it is through the funnel, and we move it to 20%, so we've got to do some work to get it to there. That is a business game changer on the profit side.
Amazing.
But if I hadn't done the work, if I hadn't looked at the numbers, if I hadn't mapped that customer journey and really had people ask me questions, because sometimes after delving in and doing all the stuff, you're like, I'm so close to it, I can't see the forest for the trees anymore. Right? Okay.
Well, I'm going to give you another quote from my coach. You'll love this one if you haven't heard it before. It's really hard to read the label when you're sitting on the inside of the jar. He goes, once in a while, you got to take a step back. You got to be the CEO and the COO of your business. And to read the label, you can't be in the jar because you're just too knee deep. You can't read the tea leaves. So I love that. Okay, number 2. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
All good. Thinking time. Taking the time, 20 minutes a week at a minimum, to think about one question on your business. Whatever that most topical conversation you're having with yourself at 3:00 in the morning that's keeping you awake, you got to solve it and move on. Thinking time. You know who does really great for this is Keith Cunningham. And he's fun. The Road Less Stupid was his book. And he's got about 700 different thinking time questions in that book. It's massive.
I love that. And do you ever give that to your team? So like maybe on Monday, I would be like, hey team, this is kind of the question for the week that we're noodling over. Come to me on Friday with some ideas or some questions. Or is this more like founder time? I need to turn off the distractions, go to Starbucks and, for half an hour over an iced tea, write out all the things I'm thinking about on that question. Like, will both of those work? Or is this really just a founder CEO thing?
So I actually do it 2 different ways. And depending on who my team is, depending on the structure of them, it's really meant for the CEO and the founder. Okay. So your thinking time is at a different level. Your vision of the business and what you're seeing is never going to be the same as everybody on your team. It just isn't, right? Right. Your objectives, those things that you may not want to share with the team, they're still in your mind. The thinking time is going to help you. But if you have a challenge, so I just did this with my team because I'd asked them the question with one of our last sessions. I said, okay, we have literally no referral program in place, no official referral program. As COOs and integrators, we like to be backseat people. We don't like to ask for things. That's just not we are not closers. Right. We're just not, because that's not our sweet spot. And so being able to have that conversation and having them step out of their comfort zone was a bit of a training tool for the people who are fractional on my team. I wanted you to be thinking about this in a variety of different ways. So we had a great 45-minute conversation. Perfect. That's twofold. One, I didn't have to do it alone because 2 heads are better than 1, 4 heads are better than 2. And 2, I got you thinking about things and some great pieces came out of that.
I love that. I love that a lot. I'm going to put this on my list or you can give the coaching to Bob, my COO. It's like, hey, let's start asking Scott a question on Monday and then have him report back on Friday with some answers. So that can be some coaching for you to Bob to me. All right, last two questions because I feel like you can learn so much about somebody with this, and then I promise we'll let you go. Question number one, and I could have you on for hours just so we could talk about like the political reality on the ground in Canada. I want to hear all kinds of stuff about living in Canada the last couple of years. But what, if anything, now that COVID's mostly in the rearview mirror, we're getting back to a lot more in-person meetings. Your business has obviously seen explosive growth in the last couple of years. What are you most looking forward to? And this could be, for you and your daughter personally, or this could be professionally. What is Susan most excited about going into 2023?
One word: travel.
Yes.
I used to travel 3 times a year at a minimum. That was really hard, sitting still and not going anywhere. That was tough.
Love it.
So I'm looking forward to travel. My daughter indicated that she really wanted to go back. So actually, just the month before everything shut down, we did a cruise. It was one of the fun things that we got to do, and I'm so glad we did it at that point in time.
Right,
We
right.
didn't get canceled. I asked my daughter where the first place is that she wants to go, and she wants to go back to Symphony of the Seas. I said, really? And she said, yeah, I really want the ice cream. I said, okay, if I just got you an ice cream dispenser, could we go somewhere else?
Perfect. So I love the travel, and I love that all kids, their number one priority is ice cream, because my son would be like, as long as there's Slurpees, Dad, as long as there's a 7-Eleven that we can go get a Slurpee, let's go wherever. Thank God Mexico has Slurpees. Question number 2, and I'll leave you on this. Favorite movie and why?
Ooh, can I say that I'm a Marvel fan?
Yeah, of course.
I just absolutely love it. I just started another Marvel series tonight, actually, while I was queuing up ready for you. And favorite one. I'm a big fan of Black Panther.
Excellent movie.
It was a great movie. Lots of fun, lots of tech, great science fiction. I don't know. Science person loves science fiction. How surprising is that, right?
Yeah, not shocking. I always love when people watch Marvel movies and then they're like, oh, that was so unrealistic that whatever. They time traveled and eliminated half the people, and the grass was cut. Like, if half of civilization is gone, how are they going to be cutting the grass? I'm like, really? The cut grass? That's where your suspense of disbelief was. Like, the time travel didn't bother you. The guy turning into the big green Hulk, that was totally understandable, but some weird nuance in the movie, that's where you drew the line. And I love when people are like watching Game of Thrones or something, they're like, well, that's not how a real sword fight would go down. And I'm like, oh, but the dragons, that's totally in your wheelhouse. Like, you were willing to accept that, but the sword fight just wasn't realistic enough for you. So I don't know if you're that kind of scientist, but I always love when people watch movies super analytical, and I'm like, bro, this is just supposed to be a release. That's why it's called like a release to all the stuff in our brain. That's why it's a superhero movie.
Also, I think that's our first repeat.
That might be our first repeat of somebody in the same movie.
Yeah.
There we go. So you're in good company. Many people, apparently, that's their favorite movie.
Nice. Well, I gotta say, I love the fact that earlier on you're talking about House of Dragon, because I've gotten into that one as well. I actually rented Crave just so that I could see that. I'll cancel it after it's done because it won't come back for another year.
Perfect.
But I'm just like, I don't watch movies usually. Now, if they are science movies like Contagion or something, I'm going to have it with a little bit of a science eye. But if I'm going to Marvel, I'm going to enjoy the movie for the fact that it's a fun movie. If I'm going to see Top Gun's Maverick, I am not sitting there caring about all of the little idiosyncrasies. I just want to enjoy the 2 hours. Thank you.
Totally. And by the way, since you're a scientist, this movie kind of flew under the radar and was not nearly as popular as it should have been. Have you seen the movie Arrival?
I have not.
Oh, put it on the list. It's called Arrival. It's a science fiction of, aliens arrive on Earth. And the whole movie is basically about the scientific process of how we would learn more about them, how we would interact with them, how we would learn their language without basically starting World War III. It's a phenomenal, science-driven movie with a very cool twist at the end, and I think you're gonna love it, especially since you have that scientific mind. You're gonna be like, oh, I see what they're doing here, and it's a phenomenal movie that for some reason just didn't get enough traction. Maybe it was like too smart for the American audience, but I, as a little bit of a movie snob, I gotta say that's probably one of the best movies of the last decade, and totally flew under everybody's radar.
Ooh, well, I've got that one on the list. I will make sure to watch it at some point soon. So you do watch movies then to just enjoy the movie? You're not going to sit there and go, I couldn't stand her haircut the entire time like my mother does?
Yeah, no, I get into two modes. I get into like, I just want to zone out, have a beer or some nachos at the theater and like just enjoy the stupidity, right? And as now that I have kids, a lot of those are stupid cartoon movies, which I can still find enjoyment in. And then other times I'm like, I'll see some review on a movie that's super critical or super positive or super negative, and like, okay, now I'm watching this with like the film snob hat on, like how was the cinematography or the costumes in style for what they were trying to represent there, and I'll get all super nerdy and just total loser. And then I usually go to Facebook and argue with my friend Matt Esplanda, who has a cinematography background. I'm like, here's why I think I hated this movie. You tell me why, as a movie snob, I really hated it. And he's like, no, you were spot on. Or he's like, you totally missed the point, bro. Go back and watch the movie through this lens. And I always go to him as my movie connoisseur. So fun times.
Nice. I love that.
Cool.
Love that.
Well, Susan,
what have I not asked you, Scott, that your audience might need to know about you?
You know, that's a really good question. You're the first person that asked that. I think I need to decide with the coaching business, pick a number, $2 million in revenue. Do I want to get there because it actually serves more clients and it serves my family better and it can completely replace my mortgage income? Or do I still love doing the mortgage business from time to time and I'm really just growing for the sake of ego? That's kind of the thing I'm trying to work out with Bob, because we're in a really nice like holding pattern right now with where we are. And I definitely want to have you back on for another talk after we hit, whether it's this year or next year at $1 million of revenue. But I kind of have to really do some soul searching and decide what the next step is in that business. I'm not sure.
I love that. What a great conversation to have.
Yeah. So we'll have you on. We'll have you on again when we're ready to have that conversation. Thanks for your time, Susan. I know it's super valuable. And what's the easiest way for people to get in touch with you? Either social media, website, like where should they start the conversation if they're thinking that they probably need some of your services?
Probably going to scalingresources.com.
Perfect.
Everything that's an email through there. It's a free sign up. Go ahead and you get some free tools with you and connect with me.
Perfect. We'll connect everybody there. Thanks again for being on.
Thank you so much, Scott. It was so much fun. Thank you.